can hear you, but it's going like 2 seconds. Can you hear me? I know, don't you agree? I think we're doing really well, and it worked. I know. I'm so happy. And Lara, I'm so excited that you agreed to do this. Like, thank you so much for your time and just being so generous. Like, with your knowledge and everything. Like, it's so kind of you. Yes.
So I'm like excited to talk about it and all that with you because I know you have not seen it yet, right?
I know, and none of our audience has seen it yet either. And so we're bringing it to New Zealand, which we're super excited about. And also, what I'm even more excited about is it just opens up the conversation that we wouldn't necessarily be having otherwise. And like you say, in a really neutral way, but in an informed way. So, what was your biggest takeaway? What surprised you the most about the movie?
So I actually wasn't actually surprised about anything in the film because this is a topic that I've spent so much time learning about over the last 10 years anyway. So there wasn't any information in the film for me that was surprising, but a lot of the people that attended the screening that I hosted were really surprised by the length that corporations go to suppress information about known health effects in the chemicals that they use and really the sort of tactics that they use. That's a page right out of the cigarette tobacco industry. And, you know, after the screening that I did, I stuck around for a Q&A and I asked people, you know, what is your biggest feeling? Like, how do you feel after seeing that? And the kind of consensus among people was that they were angry.
I bet you they were.
Yeah.
And I think that's the reality for a lot of people. Once that's the problem. Sometimes naivety is kind of bliss at the same time, because when you do get informed, and I see this all the time with clients in clinic where they've been told that their conditions are just normal or they can't fix them or whatever, and there is a stage of grief where they become really angry too. So I can only imagine once we realize like what this whole industry is teaching us or not teaching us or suppressing, there would be a huge amount and informed about our choices.
Yeah, it's, you know, I think and this wasn't really discussed in the film. Annie Leonard, who wrote the book The Story of Stuff and produced the website Story of Stuff, where they create these little short sort of animated stories about supply chain and what happens in our, what happens to the stuff that we buy and where does it go when we throw it, quote, away, which there's no such thing as away. It's just going to another place. But they have a story of cosmetics, which is a great little couple-minute short animated video to watch. And in it, she talks about this sort of false sense of having choice in the marketplace. That we don't actually have a lot of choices if what we're looking for is to have a safe product, if we want to make sure that our products are tested for safety, that they're not using toxic ingredients. Certainly this is changing and has changed a lot in the last few years, meaning there are more companies. But what she's saying in this story of cosmetics is there is this false sense that we actually have a lot of choices because we go to the store and we see like 500 different products, but they're all made with the same crappy ingredients that have, at least some of them, have a pretty robust data indicating that they are harmful to human health. And so we don't actually have as diverse a choices as we are tricked into thinking.
And Lara, you're much more of an expert on this than me. what are the rules and regulations? Like, is this a very unregulated area of health too? Like, is this a very unregulated industry?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much the Wild West, and there's different. So, you know, in the United States, and it's certainly going to be different in different parts of the world, how products are regulated. But, you know, we have different products are regulated by different agencies. And when it comes to cosmetics in particular, even though they fall under the FDA's purview, the FDA does not actually have written into their the laws about what they have purview over. They don't actually have the legal ability to require companies to test products for safety. There's only a couple of ingredients that are very tightly regulated, and those ingredients are only used in a very few number of products. And so for the most part, it is very much the Wild West. Companies can use whatever ingredients they want. They don't need to test them for safety. If those products elicit harmful reactions from people, so, you know, skin blisters, rashes, hair loss, and those are acute reactions. Most of the effects of these exposures are not actually acute like that. Companies are under no obligation to report those adverse effects to the FDA. The FDA can't even issue product recalls. So it's a very toothless is the word that I like to use. Like, it's this law that has no teeth. And when it comes specifically to cosmetics, and they do talk about, I think they talk about this in the film, you know, the only piece of legislation that we currently have regulating ingredients in cosmetics specifically was written in 1938 and actually has not been updated since 1938. So we have seen a very large number of chemicals come onto the marketplace in the decades, 80 years since then. 81 years, 82 years. And so, like, that's completely unacceptable to me that we have on, you know, this marketplace, this industry that's like, you know what, we're going to self-regulate. We don't need to have the government interfering in our business. So we're going to self-regulate. And that's actually what the beauty industry does through what's called here in the United States, the Cosmetics Ingredient Review Panel, or the CIR. And they're an industry-funded group, and all they do is look at adverse reactions, so acute adverse reactions like rashes, like skin blistering, like hair loss, things like that. So they'll report on those findings. They're not looking for chronic acute effects from using these products with endocrine disrupting chemicals for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. They're not looking at that. And all of the findings that they produce are merely recommendations. So there's no actual obligation for any companies to adhere to any of the recommendations from this industry-funded, quote, oversight group. So it's like a bit of a joke, basically.
So why do you think there's been no pressure to update that? Like, if that's from the 1920s, why isn't this being updated?
I think there's a couple reasons. Certainly, we can look to industry pushing really hard against regulations because they're like, you know what? We've been playing in the playground all by ourselves. We don't want somebody coming in and telling us what we can and can't do. And they come up with all kinds of excuses as to, why they can't enact different regulations. And they're like, and then they lean on this Cosmetic Ingredient Review Board by saying, like, we don't need to be regulated because we're doing a wonderful job of that on our own. But the truth is that they're not. So one, we have a lot more industry influence in in our government that's really kind of pushing against industry regulations. And then the other reason, and this is, none of this is addressed in the film, but this is sort of my insight into this space, is the reason why we don't have better regulation of chemicals in general, not just in cosmetics, but just in the marketplace in general, is because we don't have any kind of national healthcare system where our federal government bears the burden of the cost of the health effects associated with these exposures. So let me give you an example. There was a 2016 study that did an analysis of, I think it was just 5% of the known endocrine disrupting chemicals. These are chemicals like phthalates and bisphenols that are known to cause hormone disruption. Yes.
Can you say what endocrine disruptors are and then what those chemicals are that we just said, just so people know?
Yes, so an endocrine disruptor is just a chemical that has the capacity to interfere with our natural hormones. So the endocrine system is the hormonal system. So all of our hormones, not just sex hormones, but everything from the hormones that regulate our energy, our digestion, whether or not we're hungry or full, our testosterone, our estrogen, our thyroid hormones, all of these things. And these endocrine disrupting chemicals can alter the way that those hormones are produced, and it causes this sort of long cascade of symptoms. And so that's sort of the largest data volume that we have on the effect of chemicals outside of things like heavy metal exposures are to these endocrine disrupting chemicals. There's thousands and thousands of studies looking at endocrine disruption. And so this 2006, yes.
Okay. I was just going to say, if you're pregnant or you're wanting to get pregnant, women particularly, we can pass these on to our children, right? Like there is ongoing generational effects where it's not just your health, it's the next generation too.
And certainly these certain of these endocrine disrupting chemicals can actually interfere with our ability to have children. And then it can, especially the most vulnerable population are women of childbearing age. And that was represented in the Toxic Beauty documentary. They did talk about that when studies have been done by the federal government here in the United States, looking at levels of metabolites of these chemicals in people's urine, the populations that are most highly exposed are women of childbearing age, which is really concerning. And so, there's a lot of correlative data. It's not causative data, but it's correlative data that's saying, look, we've got these skyrocketing fertility rates. We know that fertility is fully dependent on hormone communication and signaling. And we have these chemicals that seem to directly interfere with that communication of that signaling. It's very likely a pretty significant factor in things like fertility. But for women that are pregnant or that are in those really early preconception phase, these same chemicals can not just affect us as individuals, but our children and grandchildren in ways like increasing loss of IQ points. So having children with a lower IQ, having children with developmental disabilities, having children with higher rates of developmental disorders, having higher rates or higher risk of things like testicular cancers, breast cancers, ovarian cancers as they grow up. So it's a big problem. It sounds really scary. It is really scary. It is something that we have to be concerned about. And so I'm really appreciative of films like this that are shining the spotlight. So, back to your question of why is it so bad? This study done in 2016 was looking at 5% of the known endocrine disrupting chemicals, and I think there's around 1,000 that are known or suspected. So it's a lot.
And they were only looking at 5% of them, right? So that's 5%. Okay.
Yes, and those ones were chosen specifically because they had very robust data backing up the assertion that they are linked to these chronic diseases. So they picked the endocrine disruptors that had the highest amount of data that was linking them to these small number of chronic diseases like heart disease, diabetes, loss of IQ points, and they calculated out what is the financial burden of these diseases that it can be attributed to these chemical exposures. And what they found was that this small percentage of endocrine disrupting chemicals in regards to only that small subset of like 7 or 11 chronic illnesses costs the United States $340 billion a year in healthcare costs and lost wages.
Stop it.
Yeah. So it's a lot of enormous, and that's obviously a very gross underestimate of the scale of the
But
problem.
only 5% of the 1,000 chemicals in the first place, and just from one industry. Like, that's not even looking.
Yeah, and so they were actually looking at across all industries. So they were like pesticide exposure, and it didn't really matter the source of the chemical exposure. It was just that pesticides are linked to X number, and then they broke it out for each different category. But that's a lot, and so they did a follow-up study looking at that same data points in Europe, and they found that it was about 2/3 less of a financial burden. And that's likely because in the European Union, these chemicals are regulated more strictly. I don't want to say they're regulated perfectly. They're definitely not, but they have stricter regulations about these chemicals in the EU than they do here in the US. Well, most of the EU countries have some type of government-funded healthcare. So the government in those instances is the entity that's bearing the burden of the cost. So it behooves them to regulate these chemicals more strictly because they don't want to have to pay the healthcare costs for all the diabetes and heart disease and cancer that might be attributed to these exposures. So here in the United States, we don't have any healthcare system like that. And so rather than the government actually having to recognize the financial burden, that financial burden is placed upon the consumer, on the individual, which is why we have some of the highest healthcare costs in the developed world. It's ridiculous. And so until we move out of this current healthcare model, until the government has some skin in the game, I think that's why we're not going to see these regulated. They're like, we don't have any motivation to do so.
So people at home get...
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, well, obviously we can do your course, but how do people at home, obviously it's a grassroots course where it's like, we've actually got we've got to get ourselves educated and empowered. Yes. Hence why we're both so grateful for the movie, because they can mass educate so many people all at once. That's why I got really excited. I was like, well, Lara's endorsing it. I'm doing it to New Zealand. How could I not? But how we start these, people just don't know. And I have to admit, before I got unwell and even on my journey to health, I just felt like because the cosmetic industry had all these names that I didn't understand, that was normal. Like, I didn't put it into the same category as food.
Right. Yeah. And, I think that what we do is we vote with our dollars. We demand better from companies. We demand transparency. I can tell you for the 10 years that I've been in this space, the landscape around not only awareness, but options in the marketplace has completely exploded. So 10 years ago, there was a couple, terrible makeup lines that were, quote, non-toxic or something like that. But, you couldn't find them in the store. You had to order everything online and, wait 2 weeks for it to get there. And then you go, oh, it doesn't even match my skin tone. Great. Well, this doesn't work. It's been there many times. So, the landscape has changed so much in that time. And now there are hundreds and hundreds of companies that are built upon this idea of, we want to not only be fully transparent, but we want to be very, very thoughtful about every single ingredient. We don't want to use any of these chemicals that are questionable or that have questionable research behind them indicating potential health effects. And we want to be mindful of our packaging, and we want to be sustainable, and we want to, limit our use of plastics. So there are more companies now that I can keep up with. In the beginning, I can count them all on, 2 hands. Now there's hundreds, which is amazing.
I totally agree with you. And what do you think are the easiest changes or easiest wins, 5 easiest changes that people can be aware of at home or start to change? What is the easy ones to just get rid of? Is it the coffee cup lids? What are we looking for? When it feels so hard, where do you begin?
Yeah, so I really like to start, and this is sort of expanding beyond just the skincare, cosmetics conversation, but just toxins in general in the home environment. I like to start with what's free and easy. People think being healthy costs so much money. Some of these changes are free.
Totally, Lara, totally.
Yeah. So I always like to start with what are the ones that are free and easy. Let's get people doing those, and then they can start committing a little bit more of their time and some of their resources to making these changes. So free ones are, and this one will actually save you money, stop buying scented candles, air fresheners, Febreze, any of those, even incense. Like incense is, people think it's natural, and we just need to not buy those things, and that in and of itself will save you money. Those products are releasing synthetic chemicals, synthetic fragrances, VOCs, chemicals like benzene and toluene, phthalates. All of these chemicals are have pretty robust data showing that they have direct harm to us. And not harm in that, you know, it's going to make our hair fall out, but harm that it's like chipping away at and just constantly, you know, suppressing our hormones or altering our hormones or interfering with our immune system. Long list of things. So, you know, unfortunately in this conversation, it's hard for people to kind of grasp, well, I've been using these things and I'm fine, right? Like, I don't get it. Well, if you really look under the skin, most people are not fine, right? They're dealing with insomnia. They're dealing with fatigue. They're dealing with hormone imbalance. But they don't think that has
they're not conceiving. Women.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, and you're right. Like, they're not conceiving, or you're right, they don't think it has anything to do with their symptoms because we've been taught that it's just different. Like what comes into your house, what you're smelling, what you're eating. If it's not a food thing, like people are quite informed with food now, we just put it into a different category. It's decorative. It's nice. It's a gift. It's something nice for the house. It's a treat, whatever it is.
Yeah.
We don't see it the same. And if it doesn't go in our mouth, we don't always think that it's impacting our health and our symptoms.
Yes, absolutely. And so, you know, that action just will save you money. So stop buying them and throw out the ones that you have. Just get rid of them. So that's an easy one. The other one is open your windows. Just open your windows. And so here's the problem is that, you know, we bring in all these items like scented candles and air fresheners, and then we have carpets and sofas and our cleaning products and the perfume, and all of these chemicals get trapped in our homes. And because most of our homes are built to be very energy efficient, we don't have really good air exchange rate, which means swapping out the air in your home with fresh air from outside. And at least here in the United States, the EPA has found that because of this sort of these circumstances, these energy efficient homes, plus all these chemicals that we bring in the products that we use, is that the indoor air is 5 to 10, all the way up to 100 times more polluted than outdoor air. So, which sounds crazy for me to say, like, open your windows, even if you live in a city, but it's worse inside than outside. So we want to get the fresh air in and the stale chemical air out. So and again,
you can see plants in the background as well. Is that another the fact that you like plants, obviously, as do I, and our house is filled with them? Is there another reason why you've got them there other than just being decorative?
Yes, plants help. One, they help produce oxygen, so they're providing some fresh oxygen into the environment. But there is some data that shows that certain types of houseplants, most houseplants, can actually sequester some amounts of these VOCs, like benzene, formaldehyde, that or toluene that are present in our air, that are off-gassing from our materials, that those gases can get sequestered in the soil and in the roots. So they're not a very powerful air filter, but they are like nature's air filter. And, you know, there's a little bit of a balance because we don't want to have a house that has so many plants that's so humid, because then you end up with mold.
No. I'm aware of that one real fast. It's anything with nature, right? It's got to be a balance. Too much of a good thing really is a good thing. Like, it's not a good thing.
Absolutely.
Like our bodies, anything, you've got to keep in balance with everything.
Yeah. So, you know, continuing on the free and easy. So we have get rid of the candles, open your windows, taking off your shoes at the front door. Culturally, there are many countries around the world that do this. Here in the United States, we don't. Really that often. So people just walk through their bedrooms with their dirty ass muddy boots. And I'm like, what are you doing? So one, that certainly helps to simplify the cleaning process. You're not cleaning things as much. But, you know, what we don't realize is that it's not just about like stepping in dog poop and tracking dog poop into your house. We track in, I mean, that's terrible. We don't want to do that either, but we are also tracking in if you walk across a yard or a parking lot or a golf course or anywhere, you know, you're picking up pesticides from the grasses, you're tracking those into your home. You know, particulate matter, if you're walking along the road, on a sidewalk, you're picking up the heavy metals, the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons that are coming from car exhaust, and you're tracking those into your home. This matters most if you have carpeting, if people have wall-to-wall carpeting or any kind of carpeting, because all those contaminants just get trapped in the fibers of your carpet. This is even more important if somebody has babies, has small children, because where do they go? Crawling around on the carpet, right? So
totally, Lara.
Yeah. So just take off your shoes, right? Those are sort of the basic, free and easy things that you can do to actually reduce what you're bringing into your home, or let what's coming into your home escape, or, you know, just kind of focusing on that. You know, from there, where we want to get more proactive about actively reducing our exposures, you know, for certain, making sure that we are not using plastics in the kitchen in direct contact with food or beverages. I think this is one of the ones that, you know, it seems maybe like it's a little overwhelming, but it's actually quite easy to, you know, just kind of open all your kitchen cabinets and drawers and look at all of the plastic items that we have. Dishes for kids, cups for kids, all our plastic Tupperware or food storage containers. These materials really, these plastic materials are able to leach out these chemical building blocks of the plastic that also happen to be endocrine disrupting. So we have phthalates that are in softer plastics for things like a food processor bowl. Can't avoid all plastics, so I can come back to the food processor. You know, the like Nalgene bottles, the very rigid, clear glass-like plastic that's referred to as polycarbonate plastic. Those often have bisphenol chemicals. All plastics, for the most part, are going to leach chemicals that can interfere or likely interfere with the endocrine system. And so we don't want to have our food in contact with those materials, because it's a direct passage for those chemicals to enter our bodies. So no microwaving your food in plastic, no putting your hot leftover soup or tomato soup or pasta sauce in a plastic container. You know, that's a pretty straightforward intervention. We want people to use glass or stainless steel. Instead, glass is, I think, better for food because you can see it in the fridge. Otherwise, it's like, it goes in the back of the fridge, it's closed, you don't know what's in there, and a month later, you're like, oh my God, that's where. So to prevent that, I like glass. So yeah, just swapping those out and making sure that you're using glass storage containers for your food. That one's not a big investment. You know, you can go to, most of the home stores now have glass, because it didn't used to. Used to be kind of hard to find them. So now everybody has glass containers. And, you know, it's a one-time investment to spend, you know, $30, $40 on getting all these new containers in, get rid of the old ones, you know, use them to store screws or tools or, you know, art project stuff. Just keep it out of the kitchen is my take on those. And then from there, I think, again, moving into the more proactive space, I like to focus on food, because we're eating it every day, multiple times a day. So really emphasizing organic foods whenever possible to reduce the exposure to pesticides. Yeah, so that's a big one. That can be more of an investment. You know, there are research studies that have been done on adults and children, asking them, or their intervention studies saying, we're going to put you on you're going to eat your regular conventional diet. We're going to measure your pesticide levels in your urine. And then we're going to put you on like a mostly organic diet and repeat the urine tests. And what they find in these studies is that you can drop the circulating levels of pesticides in the urine in the body by 80 to 90% in like 3 to 5 days. So really, really dramatic reduction, because...
Did you say 3 to 5 days or 3 to 5 days?
3 to 5 days. Yeah, like
wow,
really
that's dramatic.
Yeah, and
it's really fun.
Yeah, it's really fast. And what that shows us is that, first of all, not all chemicals are persistent. So most of these pesticides, not certainly all of them, but most of them are not persistent. And so the reason why, at least here in the United States, when the federal government does these body burden tests through their federal monitoring programs, the reason why we have levels of pesticides and herbicides that are showing up in 97, 98, 99% of the population is because you're constantly being exposed. And so if we want to drop those levels, we just have to stop the exposure. That's not to say that they're still not causing harm when they're there, but we can dramatically reduce our exposures to them in a really short amount of time. And it shows us again that our bodies, when given the chance, emphasis on when given the chance, can actually help to metabolize and excrete a lot of these chemicals. And, thank goodness for that we have that. So, that's organic is, I think, it pretty dang important, especially again for that women of childbearing age, having babies, etc.
Totally, Lara. And before I bring you back to the movie, just one question.
Yes.
Obviously, there's so much information out there, and this can be so overwhelming. And so Marlies, who works with me, she's doing one of your courses at the moment. But
awesome.
For other people listening, like there's heaps of this information on your website. Am I correct? You've got a course. Like, how can people learn? Like, I physically can't educate everyone on this and clinic. We just do not have enough time.
Right.
That's why I love being able to share your knowledge, share the resources. Yeah. So how do people become, if they want, yes, you've given us some quick tips, but a lot of people, and especially my clients, they want to be educated, want to be empowered, want knowledge. Where do they, what is it that you do? You make it accessible for people and in plain English. Like, that's what I love about you, Lara.
Thank you. So I think that, for people that are just people who are looking to learn about this stuff for themselves, honestly, the best place to go for that is my Instagram, because I post every single day. I'm posting a ton of information and action steps. My Instagram is at Environmental Toxins Nerd. All of my courses and the programs that I've created are designed for health professionals. So, nutritionists, naturopaths, health coaches, nurses, they're in that professional space. You don't have to be one to take a class, but they're really designed for that audience. So, if somebody's really gung-ho or they're like, oh my God, this conversation is amazing, I just want to be learning about this and doing this, they can come and check out my classes. My website is just my name, LaraAdler.com. And, that would be a great starting place. I've had many, many, many students that are not health professionals, but they're just really proactive moms. They're just people that are, dealing with their own health stuff, and they want a higher level of education than what they're getting from, the internet or something else. And my goal is then to have enough health professionals that are educated all over the world so that people who are looking for guidance on this and they are looking for someone to hold their hand will have a health professional that they trust to reach out to, because I can't do it all myself and I don't want to. I want to create this army of environmental toxin literate practitioners who know what the issues are and know how to have these conversations and guide people towards reducing exposure. So
Lara, people are asking me, can I just repeat, your Instagram account is Environmental Toxic Nerd?
Yes.
So it's Environmental Toxic Nerd, and I'll link it so that people
know. It's toxins, so TOX,
Environmental Toxin Nerd.
Yes.
Perfect. And she is a nerd in the best way possible. In terms of, you get such amazing information, like the level that you share. And what I love about your Instagram account too, that I follow as well, is when anything comes up in the media, you're all over it in terms of breaking it down for the average person and being like, hey, this is what's being said, this is the reality, or this is what we need to change. So you take away all fear and just give good evidence-based answers, where it's like, no, we can't dispute this. This is what science is telling us, or this is the evidence.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's really important in this conversation because there's a lot of, sensationalism. There's a lot of fear mongering. There's a lot of language about like, oh, this stuff's going to kill you. And I don't think that's actually helpful for this conversation because it's already scary and overwhelming. We don't need to add like threats of death and cancer in there as well. That's ridiculous. And I think that there are still a lot of people, even in the medical community, as medical professionals who have a lot of disbelief around this area of environmental toxicity and hormone disruption. And, unfortunately, the reality is, at least in medicine and at least here in the United States, I'm sure that this is a global problem, is that, in practice, there's a 17-year gap between what is coming out in the scientific literature and what happens in clinical practice. And that's also true for what happens in medical school curriculum. So they are already decades almost 2 or more decades behind the research and as it pertains to environmental medicine, even though this field has existed since, forever, right? Like caveman trying to figure out what plants he can eat. Well, that's toxicology, right? Unintentional toxicology, we'll study N of 1, is that, this is still is a very, it's an emerging field. So for example, I had my, PubMed or Google Scholar alerts for every time there was a new study published on endocrine disruption, I would be notified. 5 years ago, when I started that alert, or however many years ago, I would get an alert a few times a week, maybe 2 times a week, and there would be like 2 or 3 papers. I get them every single day, and there's between like 5 and 10 papers every single day, or at least references coming out on this topic. So the research has exploded. And what I'm trying to do is bridge that educational gap and shorten the amount of time it takes to get this information into people's hands, because it's not okay for people to go to their pediatrician or their gynecologist or their primary care physician and to be dismissed when they ask questions about like, hey, are plastics a big deal? And what do I do about organic? And it's not okay for anybody to be like, oh, that doesn't mean anything. It does mean something.
100%, Lara. And it's that research lag that's the problem, and just the medical lag that is the problem. Like, you just need to take the soy debate. We were all told that was great. Get off dairy and eat soy. There's going to be no hormone problems with soy.
Yeah, no.
20 years later, look at us now. If you know what I mean, where it's like there is that lag. And that's why it's so awesome having people like you at the forefront being really proactive about it, being like, hey, no, we do need to change this, and we need to change it now before a whole generation is exposed to it. We haven't even seen, the scary thing that I think in clinic is we haven't even actually seen the effects of this yet, especially in the next generation. And that's not to be fearful of for any mums or anything like that. It's just be proactive and be empowered. Get knowledge.
Yeah, and I think, like we were saying, like I start with free and easy. I think it doesn't have to be overwhelming. It certainly can be, but there's so much that we can do to not only reduce our exposure, but also, and this is where like the work of nutritionists is so critically important, we're dialing down our exposure, but at the same time, we're optimizing our body's capacity to deal with these chemical assaults. So that means eating all of those nutrient-dense foods that help support the liver in breaking down these toxins, making sure that we're pooping at least 1 time every single day, because that's how we actually get these toxic chemicals and other waste products out of the body. So to me, it's this like magic, duo of reducing exposure, so minimizing exposure while maximizing that excretory process and all of the the function of our livers, and making sure that we're hydrated and our kidneys are flushed and that we're sleeping and not super stressed out. Like, that's the magic. And so I think that the more of those things that people kind of weave into their lives, the better. And these are not changes that, like, look, if somebody wants to go, oh my God, I'm clearing everything out this weekend, great. You don't have to do that. Like, if you want to do that, more power to you. But, this is a process. It has taken me years of systematically cleaning up the things that I use and finding something better, and then finding something out about that thing that I thought was better, and then finding something even more better. right? So it's a learning process for all of us. And, you know, what we often struggle with as consumers is a really lack of transparency in the marketplace. So we're trying to make the best decisions possible without all of the information. So
and
this
that's
is
the key thing. We're trying to make the best decision possible. And that's okay. Like, that's some of it we just don't have all the information for yet, or we're ignorant, or we don't know.
Yeah.
So we don't beat ourselves up. It's just trying to get informed with what we can.
Yeah, and so, you know, I like to share with people that, like, this is not an all or nothing game. Anything that you do to start reducing exposures is key. And, you know, it's okay if we're never going to be toxin free, right? Like, we've long passed that time where that's even possible, because there's chemicals just everywhere in our environment. That doesn't mean that we do nothing, but that also doesn't mean that we freak out about everything. So there is, again, this idea of balance. And, you know, I remember the last trip I took on an airplane at the airport, like, I ended up doing an Instagram live because the water bottle that I brought with me, the gasket seal in the inside was torn or not put in correctly. So literally my whole water bottle just, like, leaked all on the bottom of my backpack and just soaked everything that I had. And I was like, well, I need to have water when I fly because dehydration is not good for you. And so I went and bought a big old plastic bottle of water, which I never would do otherwise. And I was like, you know what? I'm not actually worried about it. This is not a big deal to me, because one, this is one bottle, this is one flight. And it's what you do every day that matters, not what you do every once in a while. And I wanted to share that with people, because in this conversation, it's really easy for people to get super neurotic and hyper obsessed about, you know, everything being perfect and non-toxic. And I think that, you know, that's a noble desire, but we're never going to get to that place. My car has toxic chemicals. Every time I touch my steering wheel, I'm being exposed to phthalates or lead, but I can't control that because I also have to drive my car. So I have to be a human in the world. So I think it's really important to have balance. And I think it's important to take action at the same time. So starting with the things that are free, that are easy, and then kind of moving down that list. And, you know, I think once people have those free and easies and the plastics and the organic foods, then we can start looking at all those personal care products. Now, if somebody wants to start with personal care products, great. It doesn't matter. Just do it, is my take.
I totally agree with you. What is the low-hanging fruit? What can you start with today that's super easy and is just going to make you feel better, or just incrementally make you feel better? Lara, on that note, though, to bring back to the Toxic Beauty movie, do people, you've obviously seen it, and as a host bringing it to New Zealand, you only get so much information about the movie. So you're going out on a limb being like, it's got to be good, right? And so when you endorsed it, I was like, it's going to be fine. I can do this. I can put my name to it. But do people need to feel overwhelmed? Like, are they going to go into this getting overwhelmed? Is it going to be too much information that they just come out feeling awful?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you know, for me, like I said, going into the film, there was a lot that I knew most of it. You know, I didn't know the personal stories of the women that were highlighted in the film, that were involved in the Johnson & Johnson's talcum powder case, which is heavily addressed in the film. It's not entirely about that. You know, what happens is, or at least what happened to the screening that I did, is that people had a lot of questions afterwards of, where do I go for better products? Because, like, now I'm questioning everything that's in my bathroom. And the film didn't really point people towards, like, here are the retailers or here are the companies, which, you know, I recognize why they wouldn't do that. It's a documentary. It's not an infomercial, right? Like, that's not what the film is for. But I think that, you know, there's certainly, and they may have information about that on their website. I don't remember seeing anything like that, but maybe they've added it. I don't know. Yeah, I don't think so. So, you know, I think that we just want to have resources available to find better products. I certainly post them on my Instagram sometimes. I have a section of my website where I curate, here are the skincare products, here's my favorite cookware, here's my favorite this, here's some, household cleaners. For your audience, at least the ones that are local to where you are, those might not be relevant because they might not be available where you are. So there's always going to be those sort of global marketplace issues. I think that was sort of the biggest, maybe lingering feeling that people had afterwards was like, what do I do now? And where do I go for better products? And they definitely talked in the film about, the power of advocating for and asking for, a better transparency from the companies that you buy from and voting with your dollar. So they definitely talked about that a little bit at the end of the film. I really encourage people, as annoying as it might be, to be the squeaky wheel, right? Pick up the phone and call this company and say, hey, do you test for this? Hey, do your products contain that? And so am I. I mean, I'm the same. I'm like, hey, so I went on your website and 9 times out of 10, the customer service rep won't actually know how to answer your questions because they just have a script of what answers they can give. And so you got to be the squeaky wheel that says like, hey, can you give me more information? Who else can I talk to at the company that can answer this question for me? Because the more that they see that from their audience, they're going to go, it looks like people are asking for this and we should at least address it in some capacity. And I think that is, there's a lot of power in that. Women in particular, at least here in the United States, I imagine this is true in New Zealand and Australia as well, is that we are the primary drivers of the economy. We are the primary spenders of household. So we literally have more control over the entire economy and the entire product sector, all products in the marketplace, based on what we choose to buy. So let's leverage that power. Let's take advantage of that consumer power by supporting companies that are committed to producing safer, cleaner, non-toxic products, that are committed to transparency, and not support the large multinational companies that don't care about any of that stuff at all, or worse, are kind of trying to jump on the bandwagon and may have like 1 or 2 products that are like greenwashing, right? Like they're like fake clean, fake green. And like, I'm like, cool that, Johnson & Johnson has some green cleaner, but like, I'm still not going to buy them, right? Like I'm not supporting that company. So
totally agree with you, Lara.
Yeah.
And even I found in my own journey, like I'm right up front with clients, I was a shiny label, pretty design. Like I was a sucker for good advertising. My investment banking days, the prettier the logo, the prettier the packaging, it's got to be good for me. Like I was there. And I've even found myself now where I just want to support like local in Wellington or in companies that are really trying to do their best because they're changing it. Like there's this little, and it's the ugliest store in the world. Like it's in my hometown down at the end of my road. And I was like, I don't want to go. It's so ugly. And then I went in and I was like, you know what? How could I not spend my money here? Because I want to support this couple that is trying to change what we're doing in New Zealand alone. And they support New Zealand companies. And it's not about just New Zealand companies. I don't mean it like that. It was just like when I was asking them about these cleaning products, they were so sweet. They said to me, look, you could just make this at home. Here's the ingredients. And I was like, because you were so sweet, I want to come here and buy it every single time because why would I want to make it at home? Because now I want to support you because you were so generous. But it was an education process and they took the time to explain it. And it's like you say, it's really just grassroots because as you support the grassroots companies doing this, they get more money, they get more information, they can make big changes, the critical as we support layer by layer.
Yeah, and I think what's really cool is that, it's millennials that are really driving the change in the landscape, especially around personal care products and beauty products. The natural, organic, plant-based sector of the beauty industry is the fastest growing sector of the entire beauty industry. So that's mostly driven by millennials. So that's telling us that, this is not a trend, or if it's a trend that's here to stay, right? It's fully anchored in the industry. And that's really what we see also paralleled in the food industry. Like organics is the fastest growing sector of the food industry. And so, I think what's happening is we're kind of reaching this point in time where we have a greater awareness of our connection, a greater awareness of how all these other things that seemingly previously didn't matter or weren't related to anything, or like, oh, wait a second, I think everything is connected. Oh my God. And we're also reaching a point in time when people are becoming more and more chronically sick. And so the conventional approaches to dealing with chronic illness have continued to fail them. And so they're starting to expand into this quote alternative space and embrace all of these natural solutions and products. And, this certainly isn't to say that anything that's natural is automatically safe and better, because it's certainly not true. Arsenic is natural, lead is natural, opium is natural, heavy metals are natural. These things are not necessary. Just because it's natural doesn't mean it's safe. However, most of these natural materials don't have any of the health issues or even research behind they're showing health effects as these synthetic industrial chemicals. And so certainly for some chemicals that are being produced, these synthetic materials, they're never ever going to go away. There's these fluorinated chemicals, these non-stick chemicals that are showing up in our non-stick cookware and our food packaging. They're contaminating drinking water because they're used in firefighting foam. I know there's a lot of news coverage about that in Australia because they're having the exact same problems that we're having here with contamination with these chemicals. And these chemicals are so resistant to breakdown that every molecule that's ever been developed since the 1940s and 50s is still in existence. These don't go away. And so, earlier I was saying, oh yeah, pesticides, we can pee them out. These chemicals, sometimes we cannot pee them out. And so it's really critical that we practice these avoidance behaviors to make sure that we are staying away from them as much as possible.
Totally. And Lara, you can't see this, but all the feedback that's coming back is saying how fantastic you are, you're helpful, you're not making everyone feel overwhelmed, and you're really judgmental, which I knew that about you. That's why I was like, I want to get Lara on, because she's only going to say amazing things, be educational. I knew that about.
Good. And trust me, when I first started learning about this topic 12 years ago, my mind was like, holy crap, I have to tell everyone. And I made a lot of mistakes in the way that I was presenting this information, and I turned a lot of people off. And I'm appreciative of that experience, because it taught me how to have this conversation and how not to have this conversation, and what are the things that we really truly need to hear when we're taking in information that can be scary and overwhelming. It's a yes and conversation. It's not yes but, it's a yes and. Yes, it's important, and we have to be humans in the world. And yes, stress is also toxic. So we can't, stress ourselves out or become hyper obsessed and super vigilant, because that puts us in this constantly on guard, hyper vigilant state. And that's not good for our nervous system. So, it's balance, but there's a lot that we can do. And so my emphasis is on helping people understand what they can do, and then hopefully having them do it.
I 100% agree with you, Lara, and I just love that about you and your message. So I'm so grateful, and I'm also grateful that you joined us today and for your tips. And now I'm super excited to see the movie as well.
Yes.
I can't wait to learn more, and it's just going to open up more conversations, which I do agree is probably what their intention was. It wasn't necessarily to give solutions,
right?
Because it's actually getting people to talk about it. Doing these events, like if it wasn't for this movie, I probably wouldn't have reached out to you in such a hurry to make this happen.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean, I was always like, I love Lara and I tell people about you. But now it's conversations. Like I'm giving up my Saturday mornings on the lead up to the movie to get the information into clients' hands, into people's hands. So that alone, I think already is starting an amazing conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm, like I'm just, like I said, I didn't see the film before I decided to take a gamble and say, I'm going to host a screening and I'll figure, I mean, even at the intro of my screening, I was like, I haven't seen this. Hopefully it's good. If it's not good, I'll tell you. I don't think it's good. I have no association with the film. However, when seeing the preview, the people that they interviewed for the film are so, they're some of the top people in this field of studying these chemicals. And so immediately I was like, okay, they didn't just interview some rando person. They went to the best people. They're interviewing these top toxicologists. They're interviewing people who've been doing work in the public sector, public health field on research into endocrine disrupting chemicals. They're researching the book authors who are writing these books on toxic chemicals. So they're choosing what I thought was a really wonderful collection of people to interview for this film. And that is what made me have a lot of faith that the film was going to be good. So, and I was really pleased, like I said. So I think everyone's going to love it. Everyone will have their hair blown back a little bit, and everyone will be scrambling to clean out their beauty cabinet afterwards.
And the best part is, Lara, we've got our own in-house mini Lara, because Marlies, who works in my clinic, is studying with you. So excellent. They get support from her too via Lara. So we're super lucky. I've got heaps of support as well. And that was not our intention to bring this movie to New Zealand, because in clinic, we're not about overwhelming people either. Right. Let's get you educated, and now let's support you to make the changes, or whatever we can do to help you as well. And we will make sure that you're well supported. So you're well supported in the lead up, and you're going to be well supported afterwards too. So thank you so much for your time, Lara.
You are so welcome. Thank you, Shelley, and thank you, Michelle, for your comment that we could see on the chat, at least that I can see. So thank you.
We're going to see that one. We're going to see the Instagram ones. All the Instagram ones are happy too.
Okay, good. Yay. Hi, Instagram.
Thank you, Lara.
All right, bye.
Yeah, you didn't realize we were doubling up so more people could get more information.
Excellent. Love it.
Thank you, Lara. Enjoy your Friday night.
You too. Bye.
Yeah. Oh, hang on. How do we stop it? Done. Yeah.